Devil's Arithmetic, Chapter 6. Come, it's time to get dressed, Giddle said. Dressed. Hannah looked down at the flowered smock she had on, the same awful thing she'd been wearing the night before. Anything would be better. It looked like one of her grandmother's house dresses, shapeless with faded roses. Following Giddle into the bedroom, she paused only a moment, wondering about, without much hope, if the door would transfer her back to Bronx. But when she passed through, the small, dark bedroom was still solidly itself. What was dream and what was real were getting harder and harder to distinguish. What should I wear, Giddle? The woman's name came out easily now to her tongue. Hannah wasn't even sure where the closet was that held her clothes. Her real clothes. The bedroom she and Giddle had shared had only one door, which led back to the main living dining room. There were two small beds in it with wooden chests at the foot of each, and a large standing wardrobe. Between the two beds was a washstand with a stoneware pitcher and bowl. She had already discovered, to her horror, that the bathroom was a privy outside the house, and it had no light for night visits. You will wear the dress I wore as a child for Shmuel's bar mitzvah. He was so handsome and so nervous, just like today. It is too bad that your wonderful clothes from Lublin had to be burned along with your bedding, but the doctor said they carried the disease. As you arrived just 2 days ago, there was no time to make you anything else. But do not worry, Chaya. I will make you new clothes before winter comes. While Hannah stood in the center of the room, wondering which chest she should try first, Giddle went to the standing wardrobe, opened it, and pulled out a dark blue suit dress with white piping at the sleeves and neck, and a blue sash belt. It was the ugliest thing Hannah had ever seen, and babyish. Lovely, Giddle said. Nicer than anything any of the girls in our shuttle or phase have. All the other girls will be jealous. Jealous of that? Hannah was momentarily speechless, then muttered under her breath, It's a rag, a schmott. Giddle made a sound of disgust. In Lublin it may be a schmott, but here it is fit for a princess. Even Fay in her wedding dress will not be as beautiful. Now, young lady, no more nonsense. Perhaps we've been babying you too long, Miss Know-it-all. Hannah's face must have shown its instant apology through burning cheeks, for Giddle came over and immediately and put her arm around Hannah. There, child, forgive me. I am crazy with all this wedding business, and my tongue is sometimes quicker than my heart. Put on that dress. Perhaps it is, after all, a little out of fashion, but then so are we here in our shuttle. And you are not in Lublin now. She paused for a moment, as if waiting for Hannah's reply. When there was none, she went on as before. Try on the stockings and shoes. I only use them for shul and for the photographer. And then I grew, in 1 year, too big for them. They still have plenty of wear left, and I think they will fit you nicely. I was just your size at 15. At 16, I was a giant. Then I will do your hair for you, and everything will look fine. You will see. Hannah pulled the dress on. It fit her perfectly in the bodice and the sleeves, but came down way over her knees. Giddle didn't seem to think anything was wrong with that. The stockings were a heavy skin-colored cotton that came halfway up her thighs. The shoes, shiny black Mary Janes. Shaking her head, Hannah put them on as well. If she pretended she was going to a Halloween party, the outfit would be bearable. Giddle braided her hair into 2 tight plaits, then held up a pair of blue velvet ribbons. These I was saving for my own wedding. This time her voice held a hint of laughter. But who would marry that monster Yitzhak, who leaves his precious children outside like yard goods? Besides, the ribbon will look beautiful in your brown hair. She tied them around the end of the plaits, then pinned the plaits on top of Hannah's head like a crown. There, look! She pushed Hannah toward a mirror that hung on the wall. Hannah looked. Gone were her braces. Gone was the light coral lipstick her mother had allowed her to wear to the Seder. The girl who stared back had the same heart-shaped face, the same slightly crooked smile, the same brown hair, same gray eyes as Hannah Stern of New Rochelle, New York, in America. But there was something old-fashioned and unfamiliar about this Chaya Abramovitz. something haunting, like one of the old photographs on Grandma Bell's grand piano. Photographs of Grandma's family, but none of Grandpa Will's, because Aunt Eva had once explained no photographs had been saved in the death camps. We are our own photos. Those pictures are engraved only in our memories. When we are gone, they are gone. Hannah smiled awkwardly at her reflection and turned away. By noon, half the shuttle was gathered outside their door, laughing and trading stories so loudly the chickens hid in the barn, refusing to come out, even when three little boys in short pants and yarmulkes tried to coax them with corn. Hannah felt a lot like the chickens, nervous about all the loud, strange men and the laughing, chattering women. She too would have hidden in the barn if she could. Sensing Hannah's timidity, Giddle held her close as she greeted everyone by name, thanking them for the gifts as if she were the bride herself. Looking surprisingly beautiful in a dark green dress with a broad white lace collar, Giddle made sure all the tributes were piled into two wagons: crocks of butter, lengths of cloth, a white lace tablecloth, wooden bowls, and a pair of truly ugly silver candlesticks that Shmuel announced had been sent over by the Rendar himself. Even the cages of chickens went in the wagons, one in each. Giddle kept rearranging the gifts, making them to be twice as numerous, saying, "Those schnorrers in Viosk will know we honor our own." Near the barn, Shmuel and the other men stood smoking and laughing at one joke after another. When Giddle disappeared inside for a moment, Hannah thought she'd stand next to Shmuel, since she really knew no one else. But when she got close, Yitzchak shooed her away as if she were one of the chickens, waving his massive hands at her, saying, "Man talk is not for young ladies." Embarrassed at being singled out that way, Hannah spun around right into the arms of a girl her own age, who looked at her with great startled green eyes. Hannah was so relieved to see another girl, she almost cried out. "So, you are Lublin Chaya," the girl said, her voice catching strangely in mid-sentence. Before Hannah could deny it, the girl threaded her arm through Hannah's, calling out to a knot of girls who were standing by a newly arrived wagon, "I have found her, Lublin Chaya." They came over at a run, hair ribbons flying. "You see, we have been all waiting to meet you," the startled-looking girl explained, the breathiness even more in her voice more pronounced. "Ever since we heard you were coming. Imagine someone from Lublin living in our shuttle. But Tante Giddle is so fierce. Do you know my father calls her Giddle the bear?" "My father, too," one of the other girls said. "She said we could not meet you until you had rested because you've been so seriously ill. Almost died," she said. The startled girl pulled each statement out as if it was a rare gift to be examined, breathing deeply after each sentence. 10 weeks in the hospital, and no one here knowing. But she promised we would meet you at the wedding, and here you are." Hannah pulled a smile across her face in greeting. At least the dream, or whatever it was, would be more interesting with girls her own age in it. "Let me introduce you," the breathless girl said. "This is Shifre, Esther, and Yente, but we call her the Cossack." They each bobbed a head in turn. "And I," she drew a deep, heavy breath, "I am Rachel. I am going to be your best friend." "I already have a best friend," Hannah said, "at home. Her name is Rosemary." "What kind of name is Rosemary?" asked one of the girls. Hannah thought it may have been Shifre. "It is a Goyish name," Rachel said once. "Do you mean to say your best friend is not a Jew?" "As a matter of fact, she's Catholic," Hannah said, "as if that matters." "As if it matters!" The girls were clearly shocked, and Esther added, my father will not even let me talk to a Goy." "Esther, your father will not let you talk to someone from Viosk," said Rachel. "Well, I'm going to talk to someone from Viosk today," Esther answered, "after I talk to Lublin Chaya." Hannah turned to Rachel, shaking her head slowly. "You can be my second best friend, Rachel. My first best here. It seems somehow important to keep the two worlds separate. She was sure Rosemary would understand. The girls all smiled at her, waiting for something else, and Hannah could not figure out what. Trying to memorize their faces to distinguish them, she saw that Chiffre had a pale, freckled face and eyelashes so light they could not be seen. It made her eyes look shifty. Shifty. She could remember that. And Esther was plump, with rosy cheeks and a mouth that seemed to rest in a pout. She was round like an Easter egg. Esther. Easter. The third girl, the Cossack Yente, had a ferrety face, a sharp in chin and nose, and a yellowish complexion. Yente, yellow. It was a special way of remembering Aunt Eva had taught her. It worked so well she got A's in school using it. And Rachel was just Rachel, her second best friend, first here in the shuttle in the dream. So, Rachel said, interrupting her thoughts, tell us about Loveland. Hannah realized it would be useless telling them she lived in New Rochelle, as it had been trying to convince Giddel and Shmuel. The truth was, she was beginning to wonder herself whether she was Hannah and Chaya was the dream, or if she was Chaya and Hannah was some sort of craziness in her mind from the sickness. Yet there were all these memories, a house and school and Cedar, of mother and father and Aaron and Aunt Eva and the rest. She couldn't have made them all up, unless she was a genius, or crazy, or both. She had no choice. In Lublin, she began, thinking of New Rochelle, I live in a house that has 8 rooms, and the toilets are inside the house, one upstairs and one downstairs. In the house? Rachel let it out in a single breath. Imagine, said Yente, your parents must have been fabulously wealthy, richer than Yitzhak the butcher, as rich almost as the Rendar himself. The Render's house has 12 rooms, Rachel said. 13, Yente corrected. My mother's sister is his housekeeper. Her sharp nose twitched as she talked. Your mother's sister cannot count, said Rachel. She thinks there are 13 eggs in a dozen. She thinks there are 9 days of Hanukkah, added Chiffre. She thinks there are 5 fingers on a hand, Esther put in dreamily. Idiot, there are 5 fingers on a hand, Rachel said to Esther. I know that. Never mind her, Rachel confided to Hannah. She never understands a joke. Now, Chaya, tell us more. More, Hannah said, trying to think of what might interest them. Well, during the week I go to school, but on the weekends I go with Rosemary to the mall and... School too? Esther said with a sigh. Only boys are allowed to go to school here. I always wanted to go. You want to go? Hannah was shocked. No one I know does. We can't wait for the weekends. That's when we can have fun, go shopping, and... It was the girls' turn to be shocked. Shopping? On the Sabbath? Rachel asked. Esther was still thinking about the school. I heard once about a girl who disguised herself as a boy and went into a yeshiva to study Torah. I do not believe it. I know that story. Hannah's voice rose in excitement. It's called Yentl and stars Barbra Streisand in the movie. She chops off her hair and... Chops off her hair? Appalled, Chiffre put her hands up to her own pale braids. And not married? We have never seen a movie, said Esther, but I have heard of them. Never mind from movies, Rachel said sternly, the breathlessness gone for her voice for once. And no more interruptions. Tell us the story of the Yentl, Chaya, from the beginning. Chapter 7. Stories seemed to tumble out of Hannah's mouth, reruns of all the movies and books she could think of. She told the girls about Yentl, and then about Conan the Barbarian with equal vigor, about Star Wars, which confused them, and Fiddler on the Roof, which did not. She told them the plot of Little Women in 10 minutes, a miracle compression, especially since her book report had been 7 typed pages. She mesmerized them with her tellings. After the first one, which they had interrupted every third sentence with questions, they were an attentive audience, and silent except for their frequent loud sighs and Esther's nervous laughter at all the wrong moments. Rachel cried out at the end of Yentl when Hannah described Barbra Streisand bravely sailing off to America alone. and all four had tears running down their cheeks when Beth died in Little Women. Hannah wondered at this strange power she held in her mouth. It was true. Erin had always liked her stories. So did Rosemary. But as her best friend, she had to. And the Brody twins, whom she only started to babysit, could usually be kept quiet with a tale. But she'd never had such a large, appreciative audience before. Walking through the woods behind the wagons, the girls kept jostling one another for a place of honor by Hannah's side. Hannah wondered about that most of all. In New Rochelle, except for Rosemary and two other friends who had all been together since first grade, she was not very popular. There is even one clique of girls, Rosemary called them the Snubs, who never spoke to her, though three were in her Hebrew class and one as actually Rosemary's cousin. She remembered vividly standing with Rosemary at the school's water fountain, giggling and splashing each other. The Snubs came over and called them babies just when Jordan Mundell went by. He laughed at them, and Hannah had thought she'd die on the spot. Yet here was, she was suddenly the most popular girl on the block. Except there wasn't any block. She realized that she could have just made up that powerful memory. She was Hannah. But these girls, who were hanging on her every word, believed she was Chaya. And it was great to be so popular. She wasn't going to spoil it by trying to convince them she was someone else. So, let me tell you about the Wizard of Oz, she said. She couldn't remember which was the movie and which was the book. Shrugging her shoulders, she began a strange mixture of the two, speeding along until the line, "Gosh, Toto, this sure doesn't look like Kansas anymore." "What is Kansas?" Rachel asked. Just then, Giddle dropped back and listened to them. Hannah was afraid she would interrupt them or make her ride in the wagon. But all Giddle said was, "Kansas is in America, near New Rochelle." Then she walked away laughing. They wound on through the forest. Hannah guessed everyone from the shuttle was there. The tiniest children and some of the older women rode in the open wagons, but everyone else walked. Sunlight filtered through the canopy of large trees, spotlighting the forest. It was even more magical than the forest in Oz, Hannah thought. When she stopped for a moment to take it all in, the girls complained. "Go on," Chiffre said. "What happened next?" Putting her arm around Hannah's waist, Rachel smiled. "Let her be. She is only catching her breath." "You are the one who has trouble catching your breath," said Yente the Cossack. She wrinkled her long nose. "But Chaya has plenty of breath. Chiffre is right. What happened next to this Dorothy Gale?" Hannah was in the middle of a muddled version of Hansel and Gretel, having temporarily run out of movies and books and fallen back on the nursery tales she told Erin or the Brody twins. When her attention was arrested by a high, thin, musical wail, she stopped mid-sentence. The others heard it at the same time, and Yente clapped her hands. "The klezmer!" she cried. "We're almost there!" She had been holding Hannah's arm, but pulled away half a step to look longingly forward to the front of the line. For a moment, Hannah was almost annoyed at having her audience distracted. "Don't you want to hear any more?" she asked. "Never mind her, Chaya," Rachel said smoothly. "How are you to guess? Yente knows songs like you know stories. She will leave the dinner table, even at the sound of a clarinet. So ignore her and finish about this witch. Does she push Gretel in the oven or not?" But the mood was broken, and a new mood took over as the sound from the clarinet reached them. The pace of the walk, which had become leisurely, quickened. Even the horses picked up their step. The constant chatter stopped. Everyone seemed to be straining to listen. Then another instrument joined in. It took a moment for Hannah to realize that the second was a violin. It certainly wasn't like the one she labored on in Suzuki class so long and with so little result. This violin had a piercing, insistent sweetness of tone, almost like a baby crying. The wagons came to a halt as the klezmer band came around the bend in the forest path. Hannah saw that there were 3 musicians in all, the clarinet, the violin, and the accordion. The music was fast and full with wild energy. The band members strode down the line of villagers. Behind them came Shmuel, dancing with abandon, his hands above his head and his dark hair in a dark halo around it. Yitzhak followed him, big hands clapping in rhythm. Other men soon joined them. Laughing and shouting encouragement, the women watched from the side. They began to sing. Sing, Chaya! Shmuel called as he danced by her. Sing! I don't know the words, she called back. But even as she said it, she found herself singing, the words stumbling out, as if her mouth remembered what her mind did not, as if her mouth belonged to Chaya, but her head to Hannah. She began to clap madly in rhythm until the tune came to an abrupt end. Look, Rachel cried above the noise and breathiness back in her voice. They have even brought a bachan. Faye's father must have a lot of money. Or an only daughter, Esther added. Then why is she marrying Shmuel? Shifrey blurted out, looking at Hannah apologetically. She added, I mean, he is handsome, but he is not so rich or learned. And you know about Rabbi Borak. They say, Rachel began, and the girls bent closer as her breath gave out. They say that Faye's his favorite and always gets her way. They say she saw Shmuel and fell in love. In love, the girls breathed words in rhythm. So, Hannah was puzzled. So they fell in love. So, it may happen in Lublin that a Jewish girl marries for love, said Shifrey. But here in the country, we still marry the one our parents pick out with the Shad Chan, our marriage broker. Even today? Hannah asked, not sure when today was. Even today, they all said together. Hannah turned to look at the man Rachel had pointed out as the bad Chan. She wondered who he was. The words seemed to have no easy translation in her head. As she watched, the tall, skinny man circulated from group to group. Each knot of people he left was laughing uproariously. Maybe he was some sort of comedian. When the bad Chan got to the girls, he squatted down in front of them. He was so tall, even squatting, he towered a full head above Rachel, who was the smallest of them. Then he began in a sing-song manner to rhyme about each one in turn. When he got to Hannah, he pointed his finger at her and sang, Pretty girl with faraway eyes, why do you look with such surprise? Oh, how'd you get to be so wise? Old girl in young girl disguise. That's you, Chaya, Giddle called out from behind them. What a fine Bachan. Without taking his eyes off Hannah, the Bachan said, So, your name is Chaya, which is to say life. A strong name for a strange time, child. Be good life, and long life to your friends, young old Chaya. He stood up slowly, unfolding like some kind of long-legged bird, and danced away to the next group of villagers. Strange, Hannah remarked, no one in particular. Well, that is what he is hired to be, Rachel said. Strange and mysterious. And to make up rhymes, sing songs, tell fortunes. He said I look startled by life, Chaya. Do you think so? She put her arm through Hannah's. Hannah shrugged, but she wasn't really thinking about what Rachel said. She was watching the bad Chan. He reminded her of something or someone, but she couldn't think what. Then he tipped his hat to one of the old women on the wagons. It came to her. He was like a court jester, only instead of wearing those colorful caps with bells, he wore a black hat like the other men, and the bottom of his coat danced along with his every move. The idea of a Jewish jester so tickled her she began to laugh out loud without even knowing the joke the other girls joined in.